The first time Diana Ortega saw the Vampire King cry, she thought perhaps the legends had gotten it wrong and immortals could bleed after all. She had been cleaning the upper floors of the Harrowick Estate for 3 months, pushing her cart through hallways so silent they swallowed the sound of her own breathing, polishing mirrors that reflected only her plain face and tired eyes, scrubbing floors no one seemed to walk on. The agency had told her the pay was exceptional because the hours were difficult and the employer reclusive, and Diana, who had been poor her entire 23 years, had learned not to ask questions when good money appeared. She worked midnight to dawn, alone except for the occasional glimpse of pale figures who moved too quickly to be quite real, who nodded to her with ancient courtesy and never looked her fully in the face. Tonight, the November wind rattled the tall windows, and her hands ached from the cold that crept through the stone walls despite the heating. She had finished the library, the gallery, the endless bedrooms that smelled of disuse and old roses, and was heading toward the final corridor when she noticed the door. It stood ajar, golden light spilling across the dark wood floor, and she could hear something that made her heart stutter against her ribs. Crying. Not the soft weeping of ordinary sorrow, but the kind of broken, gasping sobs that come when someone has held their grief so long it finally tears free. Diana's mother had cried like that the night they lost their home. Diana herself had cried like that when her mother died. She should have turned away. She knew the rules. Clean what you're told to clean, see nothing, say nothing, collect your paycheck, and go home to your tiny apartment where the radiator clanged and the neighbors fought through paper-thin walls. This job was the only thing keeping her afloat. She couldn't afford curiosity, but her feet carried her forward anyway, and she pushed the door open wider. The room beyond was a study, all dark wood and leather, shelves of books rising to a ceiling painted with constellations. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting jumping shadows across the figure hunched in the chair before it. He was beautiful in the way winter storms are beautiful, dangerous and vast and merciless. White hair fell past his shoulders, catching the firelight like frost catching sun, and his skin was so pale it seemed almost translucent, showing the faint trace of veins at his temples, his wrists. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled back and his face was buried in his hands, his whole body shaking with the force of his weeping. Diana had seen him once before, passing through the entrance hall with several other pale figures trailing him like a comet's tail. Someone had murmured, "His Majesty," and she'd understood without being told that this was Yulian Harrow, the one who owned this house, this hidden world, perhaps everything in it including her contract. He had looked untouchable then, carved from marble and moonlight, every inch a king. Now he looked destroyed. She crossed the room before she could think better of it, her worn sneakers silent on the Persian rug, and when she reached him, she did the only thing that felt right. She took his hand. His fingers were cold, long and elegant and trembling, and they closed around hers with desperate strength. His head jerked up, eyes meeting hers, and Diana felt the air leave her lungs. His eyes were silver, true silver, like mirrors reflecting the moon, and they were drowning in tears. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic planes, inhumanly perfect, except for the rawness of his grief, the wetness on his cheeks, the vulnerability that made him suddenly, impossibly real. "I'm sorry," Diana whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. For intruding, perhaps, for witnessing, for the fact that someone who looked like him, who commanded the kind of power she'd felt crackling in the air around him, could hurt this badly. He stared at her as if she were speaking a language he'd forgotten, his breath coming in sharp gasps, his hand still gripping hers like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "You should not be here," he said finally, and his voice was rough, accent curling through the words in a way that spoke of centuries and distant countries. "You should not see me like this." "I know," Diana said. She didn't let go. "But I'm here anyway." Something shifted in his expression, surprise chasing across his features before he seemed to remember himself. He released her hand and stood in one fluid motion, turning away from her, his shoulders rigid beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. "Leave," he said, and now his voice was cold, absolute, the voice of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Forget what you saw. Speak of it to no one." Diana should have run. Every instinct except one told her to get out while she could, before whatever protected her as an employee evaporated in the face of this intrusion. But the instinct that kept her rooted was louder than the rest, the bone-deep certainty that walking away from someone in this much pain was unforgivable. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "What hurts you this badly?" He went very still. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, and somehow that was more frightening than his earlier command. "You dare question me? You, a human, a servant in my house?" "I'm a cleaner," Diana corrected, which was possibly the stupidest thing she'd ever said, but felt important somehow. "And I'm not questioning you. I'm asking if you're all right, which you're clearly not." He turned then, and the look on his face should have turned her to stone. Fury and humiliation warred in his eyes, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked like a king again, terrible and remote, and Diana realized with a strange calm that he could probably kill her without effort. Vampires were strong, fast, immortal. She was nothing. "Get out," he said, each word precise as a knife blade. "Now, before I make you regret your compassion." Diana met his eyes and saw past the anger to the shame beneath it, the mortification of having been seen at his weakest by someone so far beneath his station it shouldn't even register. She understood that shame. She'd felt it every time she'd had to choose between food and electricity, every time she'd cleaned the homes of people who looked through her as if she were invisible. "All right," she said gently. "I'll go. But for what it's worth, there's no shame in crying. Whatever you lost, whatever happened to you, you're allowed to grieve it." She turned and walked to the door, her heart hammering now that she'd finally found her sense of self-preservation. But before she crossed the threshold, his voice stopped her. "How do you grieve something that was your fault?" She looked back. He stood silhouetted against the fire, head bowed, the perfect picture of solitary anguish. "You grieve it anyway," Diana said. "And maybe, if you're lucky, you eventually forgive yourself. Or at least learn to carry it better." She didn't wait for a response. She slipped out and pulled the door closed behind her, her hands shaking as she gripped her cleaning cart and continued down the hallway. She finished her shift in a daze, her mind replaying the weight of his hand in hers, the terrible beauty of his face wet with tears, the brokenness in his voice. When she left the estate as dawn stained the sky gray, she was certain she'd be fired by the next shift. Possibly she'd be lucky if firing was all that happened. But when she returned the next night, the door guard nodded her through as usual, and she found her cart waiting in the service entrance, and the list of rooms to clean was exactly the same as always. She worked through her tasks with her stomach in knots, jumping at every sound, expecting at any moment to be summoned and dismissed, or worse. The study where she'd found him wasn't on her list. It never had been. But when she passed the door, she found it slightly open again, and the corridor beyond was dark. Diana stood there for a long moment, arguing with herself, common sense battling that same stupid instinct that had gotten her into trouble in the first place. Then she knocked, soft but clear. "I'm not here to bother you," she said to the darkness. "I just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. I hope tonight is kinder." Silence answered her. She nodded to herself and moved on. The next night, she did it again. A quiet knock, a few soft words. "I hope you're all right. You're not alone, even if it feels like you are." And the night after that. "My mother used to say that grief is love with nowhere to go. If you're grieving, it means you love something. That's not shameful. It's human." She paused, then added, "Well, you know what I mean." She never expected an answer, and for 2 weeks she didn't get one. But she kept stopping at the door, kept offering her small bits of comfort to the silence, because it felt better than doing nothing. Then one night, as she turned to leave after her nightly message, the door swung fully open. Yulian Harrow stood in the doorway, dressed in dark clothes that made him look like a piece of the night itself, his white hair pulled back from his face, his silver eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Why?" he asked simply. Diana adjusted her grip on the cleaning spray bottle she was holding, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look in her stained work uniform with her hair escaping its ponytail. "Why what?" Why do you persist in this? I gave you an order. I told you to forget what you saw. Instead, you return each night to my door like some determined ghost." He sounded genuinely puzzled beneath the imperious tone. "Do you seek payment? Reward? Are you attempting to gain leverage for blackmail?" "What? No." Diana felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I just thought you might need to know someone cares." "You don't know me." "No," she agreed, "but I know what it looks like when someone's drowning, and I know what it feels like when no one throws you a rope." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped aside. "Come in." It was not a request. Diana hesitated, weighing the wisdom of entering a vampire's private study alone at 3 a.m. Then she thought of his hand in hers, his shaking shoulders, and she stepped inside. The room looked different with the lamps lit, warmer somehow, the books on the shelves showing their worn spines, and the desk scattered with papers. He gestured to a chair near the fire, and she sat, perching on the edge, while he remained standing, pacing slowly. "You're right that you don't know me," he said finally. "But you're wrong about something else. People care. My court cares. My advisors, my guards, the families that depend on this house, they care very much about my well-being and the stability of my rule." He paused by the window, looking out at the night. "What they don't do is see me as anything other than what I must be. The king, the ancient one, the final word and the steady hand." "That sounds lonely," Diana said quietly. "It is the nature of leadership. One cannot be vulnerable and be trusted with power." "That's a horrible choice." He glanced at her, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. "You're very bold for someone who cleans my floors. You're very sad for someone who has everything." The amusement vanished. He turned fully to face her, and she saw the defenses rise in his eyes like walls slamming into place. "You presume much." "You're right. I'm sorry." Diana stood, feeling suddenly that she'd pushed too far, that the fragile thread of this conversation was about to snap. "I should get back to work." "Sit down." It was pure command, the voice of someone who'd ruled for so long that obedience was instinctive. Diana's legs folded under her before she'd even processed the words. She frowned up at him. "That's not fair. I'm a vampire king. Fair is not in my job description." But he looked vaguely uncomfortable, as if he'd surprised himself. "I apologize. That was unnecessarily forceful. Please, sit, if you're willing." Diana sat back down slowly, watching him warily. He resumed his pacing, hands clasped behind his back. 273 years ago tonight," he said, his voice careful and controlled, "I made a choice that led to the deaths of nearly half my people. We were at war with another vampire house. I was young for a king, only a century old, and I thought I knew better than my advisors. I led our forces into a battle we should have avoided, in a place we should never have been, and we were slaughtered." He stopped, staring into the fire. "I survived, of course. Kings always survive. But the screams of the dying haunt me still, and every year on this night I remember every single face, every single name." Diana felt tears prick her eyes. "That's why you were crying." "That is why I am always crying on this night alone, where no one can witness my weakness. It's not weakness to mourn the people you lost. It is weakness to mourn for this long. It is weakness to let old grief cripple you. I have a responsibility to be strong, to lead, to ensure nothing like that ever happens again." His hands clenched behind his back. "And yet every year I fall apart like I am still that young fool standing on a battlefield of corpses, realizing what my arrogance has cost." Diana didn't know what to say to that. The weight of 273 years of guilt was beyond her comprehension, beyond anything her 23 years of life had prepared her to address. But she knew about guilt, about the way it could eat at you from the inside. "Did you learn from it?" she asked. He looked at her sharply. "What?" "The battle, the choice you made. Did you learn from it? Have you made the same mistake again? No, he said immediately. Never. I have fought 12 wars since then, and I have never lost another one. I have protected my people with everything I am. Then maybe you're punishing yourself for being young and making a mistake instead of honoring what you became after. His expression went through several shifts too fast to track, landing on something between anger and desperation. You make it sound simple. I'm not trying to simplify it. I just think that if the people who died could see you now, see what you've done with the guilt of losing them, they might not want you to suffer forever. She twisted her hands together. My mom died 3 years ago. Cancer. We couldn't afford the good treatments, and by the time I'd saved enough for the second round, she was already too far gone. I blame myself for not working harder, not finding a way, but she told me before she went that if I spent my life drowning in guilt over her, she'd haunt me. She said she wanted me to live, really live, not just survive, and that the best way to honor her was to be happy despite losing her. Yulian was very quiet, watching her with those unsettling silver eyes. I'm not comparing our situations, Diana added quickly. Obviously, what you went through is much bigger. I just mean that grief is grief, and at some point you have to decide if you're going to let it destroy you or if you're going to carry it and keep going. And which have you chosen? Diana thought about her tiny apartment, her night shift cleaning job, the way she'd given up on dreams of college or travel or anything beyond making rent each month. I'm working on it, she admitted. Something in his face softened, just a fraction. As am I. Though I have had considerably more time to work and considerably less success. They looked at each other across the firelit room, and Diana felt something shift between them, some mutual recognition of shared pain despite the enormous gulf of their differences. He was immortal, powerful, a king of the hidden world. She was nobody, nothing, a woman who scrubbed floors and worried about bills. But in that moment they were just two people who knew what it meant to carry impossible weight. Thank you, Yulian said quietly, for not looking away. For these past weeks, speaking to my door like some kind of determined missionary of compassion. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was absurd, but it mattered. Diana smiled. You're welcome, and for what it's worth, I think you're doing better than you give yourself credit for. You're still here. You're still leading. You're still protecting people. That takes incredible strength. Or stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. He moved then, crossing to the chair opposite hers and sitting down, which felt significant somehow, this ancient king lowering himself to her level, making himself less towering and remote. What's your name? He asked. I confess I don't know the names of most of the cleaning staff. That's a failure of mine. Diana Ortega. Diana. He said it carefully, like he was tasting the shape of it. I am Yulian Harrow, though you already knew that. Your Majesty, Diana said, suddenly uncertain of the protocol. He waved a hand dismissively. Here now, you may use my name. You've earned that much by sheer persistence. They talked for another hour, cautiously at first, then with increasing ease. He asked about her life and seemed genuinely interested in the answers, his ancient eyes sharp as she told him about growing up poor, about losing her mother, about the strange loneliness of cleaning houses full of beautiful things she'd never own. She asked him about his world, and he answered with surprising openness, telling her about vampire politics, the delicate balance of the hidden houses, the way immortality changed perspective until human concerns seemed fleeting as candle flames. Do you ever regret it? Diana asked. Being immortal? Having to watch everything change while you stay the same? Every day, Yulian said softly. And never. It's a contradiction I've learned to live with. When she finally left to finish her cleaning rounds, the sky outside was already lightening toward dawn, and she was hours behind schedule. She rushed through the remaining rooms, her mind still in that fire-lit study, still caught on the way his face had changed when he smiled, rare as lightning but just as striking. Over the following weeks, it became routine. She would work through most of her shift, then stop at his study where the door would be open, and they would talk until nearly dawn. He told her stories of centuries past, of places he'd seen and battles he'd fought, of the slow evolution of his people as they learned to hide themselves in an increasingly skeptical modern world. She told him about her dreams, the things she'd wanted before poverty and loss had made her practical, the way she still sometimes hoped for more even when hoping felt dangerous. "You should go back to school," Yulian said one night. "Study art history. Wasn't that what you wanted?" "Can't afford it." "I could pay for it." Diana shook her head firmly. "No. Thank you, but no. I don't want to be some charity case." "It wouldn't be charity. Consider it payment for services rendered. You've been acting as my therapist for weeks now." "I've been acting as your friend," Diana corrected. "And friends don't take money from each other like that. It makes things weird." He looked at her for a long moment. "Is that what we are? Friends?" "I think so, unless you have a better word for whatever this is." "No," he said slowly. "Friend is good. I haven't had one of those in a very long time." But Diana was beginning to suspect that friendship wasn't quite the right word for what she felt when she looked at him. It didn't cover the way her heart sped up when she entered the study and found him waiting, or the way she caught herself watching his hands when he gestured while talking, or the way his rare smiles felt like gifts bestowed on only her. She was falling for him, had probably been falling since the moment she took his hand in the darkness, and the realization terrified her. He was a vampire king. She was a human cleaner. It was impossible, absurd, the kind of fantasy that lived in stories and died in reality. She tried to pull back, to protect herself. She started skipping nights, finding excuses to work through her entire shift without stopping at his door. But on the third night of avoidance, he found her. She was cleaning one of the guest rooms, wiping down mirrors that reflected only her own worried face, when she felt the temperature drop and turned to find him standing in the doorway. "Have I offended you?" he asked without preamble. "What? No, of course not." "Then why are you avoiding me?" Diana set down her cloth and tried to think of a lie that would sound convincing. Nothing came. She'd never been a good liar. "I just thought maybe we were spending too much time together," she said carefully. "You have important things to do, and I'm keeping you from them. My important things have survived for centuries. They can continue to survive a few more hours each night." He stepped into the room, his expression serious. "Diana, if I've made you uncomfortable in any way, please tell me. The last thing I want is for you to feel unsafe." "I don't feel unsafe. I feel the opposite." "Then what's wrong?" She looked at him standing there in his expensive clothes with his impossible beauty and his actual literal kingship, and she felt the gulf between them like a physical ache. "I'm getting too attached," she admitted quietly. "And that's dangerous for someone like me." Understanding dawned in his silver eyes, followed by something else, something that made her breath catch. "Dangerous," he repeated. "Yes, I suppose it is." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could feel the cold that radiated from his skin like standing near an open freezer. "It's dangerous for me as well," he said softly. "I am a vampire king. I cannot afford distractions. I cannot afford vulnerabilities. Caring for someone gives my enemies leverage, creates weak points in my defenses. And I have enemies, Diana. Ancient ones, cruel ones. Ones who would hurt you simply to hurt me if they knew what you were beginning to mean to me." Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What am I beginning to mean to you?" "Everything," he said simply. "You walked into my darkest moment and held my hand. You kept showing up at my door with your stubborn compassion. You listened to 273 years of guilt, and you didn't flinch, didn't judge, didn't offer me empty platitudes. You saw me at my absolute worst and you came back. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" "Yulian," she whispered, his name feeling natural now, feeling right. "I'm trying to warn you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm trying to tell you that caring for me is complicated and dangerous and will upend your entire life. I'm trying to give you the chance to walk away now, while you still can." Diana reached up and took his hand, the same way she had that first night, her small warm fingers wrapping around his long cold ones. "I don't want to walk away. He closed his eyes like she'd struck him. You should. Probably. But I've never been very good at doing what I should. She squeezed his hand. I see you, Yulian. Not the king, not the vampire, not the legend. You. The person who cries for his lost people every year. The person who listens to me talk about art history like it matters. The person who's been alone for so long he forgot what it felt like to be seen. I see you, and I'm not going anywhere. When he opened his eyes, they were blazing, silver gone to white-hot steel, and she saw the war happening behind them, centuries of control battling against want. I could hurt you, he said hoarsely. I'm stronger than you can imagine. I could break you by accident. You won't. I drink blood to survive. Human blood. The thought of your blood calls to me every time you're near. And yet you've never hurt me. You've never even frightened me, not really. Diana. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse. If I let myself have this, have you, I won't be able to let you go. Do you understand that? I have lived for centuries, and I have never felt like this. And if I let myself fall, I'll fall forever. Then fall, Diana said. I'm already falling. I've been falling since that first night. He made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a groan, and then he was kissing her. His lips were cold against hers, but his hand came up to cup her face with devastating gentleness, his thumb brushing her cheekbone as if she were something infinitely fragile. The kiss was soft at first, almost questioning, and Diana rose on her toes and kissed him back with all the feeling she'd been trying to suppress for weeks. He pulled her closer, his other arm wrapping around her waist, and she felt the inhuman strength in him held in perfect check, felt the way he trembled with the effort of being gentle. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, her face flushed and his eyes still blazing with that supernatural light. This is insanity, he said, his forehead resting against hers. This will complicate everything. I know. My court will object. They'll say you're a distraction, that you're unsuitable, that a human has no place beside a vampire king. They're probably right about some of that. I don't care. His arms tightened around her. Let them object. Let the whole world object. I have been alone for so long, Diana. I'm not going back to that now that I've found you. Diana felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer overwhelming intensity of everything she felt. I'm not going anywhere, she repeated. I promise. They stood there holding each other while dawn crept closer, a vampire king and a human cleaner, and Diana thought that maybe impossible things happened more often than people believed. Maybe love was always a little bit impossible, always required some leap of faith into the unknown. The following weeks were complicated in ways Diana hadn't fully anticipated. Yulian introduced her to his court, a gathering of pale, elegant vampires who looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. She met his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed woman named Seraphine, who had known Yulian for 3 centuries and made it clear she considered Diana a temporary distraction at best. She met the Council of Elders who advised him, ancient vampires who spoke in careful diplomatic language that barely masked their disapproval. Through it all, Yulian remained steadfast, his hand at her back or tangled with hers, his expression daring anyone to challenge his choice. He didn't bow to their concerns, didn't apologize for her presence, didn't even acknowledge their objections as worthy of response. He was every inch the king, absolute in his authority, and if he decided Diana belonged at his side, then that was the end of the discussion. It should have been romantic, and it was, but it was also exhausting. Diana felt constantly on display, constantly judged, constantly aware of how much she didn't belong in this world of immortal politics and ancient grudges. She kept her cleaning job because she needed the security of her own income, because she needed to feel like she was still herself and not just some human pet the king had taken an interest in. Yulian offered repeatedly to provide for her, to set her up in comfort, and she refused every time. I need to stand on my own feet, she explained one night when they were alone in his study. If I let you pay for everything, then I'm just proving your court right, that I'm here for what I can get from you. That's absurd. No one thinks that. Everyone thinks that. Seraphine told me yesterday that I was a convenient diversion who would bore you within a decade. Direct quote. Yulian's eyes went cold. She said that to you? It's fine. She's not wrong that I'll age and you won't, that I'll die and you'll keep going. Those are just facts. Those are possibilities we'll address when and if we need to. He pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the slow beat of his heart. Vampires' hearts only beat a few times per minute, just enough to keep them animated, and she'd learned to find the long pauses between beats soothing rather than unsettling. I don't want you to worry about decades from now. I want you to be here, now, with me. I am here. I'm just also terrified and exhausted and wondering if I'm being selfish keeping you tied to someone so temporary. He tipped her face up to his expression fierce. You're not temporary. However long we have, it's not temporary. Every moment with you matters. And if someday you decide you want to join my world permanently, the option exists. Diana had been trying not to think about that option. Vampires could turn humans, though it was rare and dangerous and required a level of commitment that terrified her. To become what he was would mean leaving behind everything human, living in the shadows, drinking blood, watching the world change across centuries. It was immortality, but at a cost she wasn't sure she could pay. Let's not talk about that yet, she said. Let's just be us for now. All right, he agreed, but know that the offer stands. When and if you're ready. As winter deepened and the anniversary of that long-ago battle approached again, Diana felt Yulian begin to withdraw. It was subtle at first, a distraction in his eyes during conversations, a tendency to stand at windows staring into the night. Then it became more pronounced. He spent longer hours with his counsel, took meetings at times he'd usually spend with her, began canceling their nightly talks with apologetic messages delivered by servants. Diana understood, intellectually, that he was bracing for the grief that came every year at this time, but it still hurt to feel him pulling away, to wonder if Seraphine had been right, and he was already growing bored. She tried to give him space, tried not to be demanding, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. Then, 2 nights before the anniversary, she knocked on his study door during her shift and got no answer. She hesitated, then opened the door anyway. He was there, standing at the window with his back to her, his shoulders rigid. Yulian, she said softly, you should go. It was the same tone he'd used that first night, cold and absolute, and it hit her like a slap. What's wrong? Talk to me. There's nothing to talk about. I need to be alone. Diana stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Is this about the anniversary? His shoulders tightened further. Leave, Diana. No. He turned then, and the look on his face was terrible, all his careful control stripped away to reveal raw pain and anger beneath. I said leave. That's an order. I'm not one of your subjects. I'm the woman who loves you, and I'm not leaving you alone to drown in this. The anger cracked, showing the grief beneath. You don't understand. When that day comes, I'm not fit company for anyone. I will spend it as I always have, alone, remembering every face, every name, every scream. I won't inflict that on you. You're not inflicting anything on me. I'm offering to be here, to sit with you, to hold your hand like I did the first time. She moved closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. You don't have to perform strength for me, Yulian. You don't have to be the unshakable king. You can just be the man who's hurting, and I can be the person who stays anyway. Why? The word broke from him like something torn loose. Why would you want to see me like that? Why would you want to spend a day watching me fall apart? Because I love you, Diana said simply. All of you. The king and the man. The strength and the grief. You told me once that grief is love with nowhere to go. Let it have somewhere to go. Let it have me. He stared at her, his silver eyes bright with unshed tears, and she saw the moment his defenses finally fully crumbled. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, his body shaking with the force of what he'd been holding back. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Yes, you do. You deserve to be loved through the worst parts, not just the easy ones. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped together in the lamplight, and Diana felt the shift happening between them, the last walls coming down. This was the deepest intimacy, she realized. Not the kissing or the declarations or the romantic gestures, but this, being seen at your absolute worst and not being abandoned. When the anniversary arrived, Diana called in sick to her cleaning job and spent the day in Yulian's study. She had wondered what it would be like, watching him grieve, and the reality was both better and worse than she'd imagined. He was quiet for long stretches, staring into the fire, tears sliding silently down his face. Sometimes he would talk, telling her about the people he'd lost, their names and histories and quirks. There was Mikhail, who had loved music and played the violin like an angel. There was Evangeline, who had been training to take a seat on the council. There was Thomas, who had made terrible jokes and worse puns and had made everyone laugh despite themselves. 273 names. He knew them all. He remembered them all. Diana sat beside him and listened, holding his hand, offering tissues when he needed them, saying little because there was nothing to say that would make this better. Sometimes he would rest his head on her shoulder and she would stroke his hair, that beautiful white fall of silk, and feel the dampness of his tears soaking through her shirt. She had never felt more useful or more helpless in her life. As night fell and the anniversary technically ended, Yulian seemed to come back to himself slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. He looked exhausted, wrung out, but also lighter somehow, as if sharing the weight had eased it. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, "for staying, for listening, for not running away screaming. Where else would I be?" He kissed her then, soft and grateful and full of emotion too big for words, and Diana kissed him back with all the love she couldn't quite articulate. "I need to tell you something," Yulian said when they finally broke apart. "Something I've been thinking about for weeks." Diana's stomach tightened with sudden nervousness. "Okay. When I lost those people, when I stood on that battlefield and realized what my arrogance had cost, I made a vow. I told myself I would never forget them, would never let their deaths be meaningless, and I've kept that vow. Every year I remember. Every decision I make, I measure against that loss. But I've realized recently that I've been remembering wrong." "What do you mean?" "I've been drowning in guilt, in self-punishment, in the belief that I don't deserve to move on. But that's not honoring them. That's using them as an excuse to deny myself happiness, to avoid being vulnerable again." He cupped her face in his hands. "You said once that if they could see me now, they might not want me to suffer forever. I think you were right. I think they'd want me to learn, to grow, to lead well, but also to live. Really live, not just exist." Diana felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I think they would too. So I want to do something different. I want to create a memorial, something public, something that honors them not with my private grief, but with communal remembrance. A place where anyone who lost someone in that battle can go to remember, to grieve together, to speak the names of the dead aloud." "That's beautiful. Will you help me?" "I don't know how to make this happen. I've spent so long keeping this locked inside that I don't know how to open it up. But you understand people. You understand what it means to need to honor the ones you've lost. I need your help." Diana felt the weight of what he was asking, the trust implicit in it. He was inviting her into the most painful part of his past and asking her to help him transform it into something healing. "Of course I'll help you," she said. "Whatever you need." Over the following months, they worked together to design the memorial. Yulian reached out to the families of those who'd been lost, many of whom had been observing their own private griefs for centuries. Some were hesitant, protective of their pain. Others were eager, grateful for the acknowledgement, for the chance to speak about their loved ones openly. Diana helped coordinate, helped plan, helped with all the human details that Yulian, for all his centuries of leadership, sometimes overlooked. They found a space in the heart of the vampire district, a courtyard that had been empty for decades. Yulian hired craftsmen to create a monument of white stone carved with all 273 names, arranged in a spiral that drew the eye upward toward the open sky. Around the monument, they planted night-blooming flowers that filled the courtyard with pale beauty and sweet fragrance. They commissioned musicians to compose a piece to be played at the dedication, something that captured both sorrow and hope. Diana watched Yulian change as the project progressed. The anniversary still hurt him, would probably always hurt him, but the pain was different now, shared rather than solitary, transformed into something that connected him to others rather than isolating him. He talked about the lost ones more freely, told stories about them to his court, spoke their names without flinching. The guilt was still there, but it no longer ruled him, no longer defined every moment of his existence. And their relationship deepened in ways Diana hadn't anticipated. Working together on the memorial showed her sides of Yulian she hadn't seen before. His attention to detail, his deep care for the families of the lost, his willingness to be vulnerable in front of others. She watched him speak with an elderly vampire woman who'd lost her son in the battle, saw the way he listened to her memories with complete focus, the way he promised her son would never be forgotten. She watched him review designs with the artisans, rejecting anything that felt too grandiose or impersonal, insisting on something beautiful but human in scale. She watched him become not just the king, but the man, right in front of her eyes. Yulian, for his part, seemed to marvel at Diana's ability to connect with people, to make the families feel heard and valued, to keep track of countless small details while never losing sight of the bigger purpose. He told her repeatedly that he couldn't have done this without her, that she'd given him not just the idea, but the courage to actually follow through. "You changed my heart," he said one evening as they reviewed the final plans for the dedication ceremony. "That first night, when you took my hand, something shifted. I'd been frozen for so long, locked in my guilt and my grief, and you thawed me out. You made me believe I could be more than my worst moment." Diana felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You were always more than that. I just helped you see it." The dedication ceremony was held on the anniversary of the battle, transforming the day from one of private anguish into one of communal remembrance. Nearly 200 vampires attended, including many of Yulian's court and all the families who'd lost someone. They gathered in the courtyard as night fell, the white stone monument glowing in the lamplight, the night-blooming flowers releasing their fragrance into the cool air. Yulian stood before the monument and spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. He talked about the battle, about his failure of leadership, about the 273 people who died because of his mistakes. His voice shook but didn't break. He named his own guilt clearly, but didn't drown in it. Then he invited anyone who wanted to share a memory to step forward. One by one, people came. A woman who talked about her brother's kindness, a man who remembered his wife's laugh, an elderly vampire who'd lost his best friend and hadn't spoken about it in 2 centuries. The stories wove together into a tapestry of lives lived and lost, of love that persisted beyond death, of grief that was finally given space to breathe. Diana stood at the edge of the crowd with tears streaming down her face, watching Yulian stand tall and present through all of it, watching him thank each speaker, watching him embody both strength and vulnerability in equal measure. When the last person finished speaking, the musicians began to play the commissioned piece, something that started as a lament and gradually transformed into something hopeful, bittersweet but beautiful. As the music swelled, Yulian crossed to Diana and took her hand, pulling her close. Around them, others were doing the same, seeking comfort in touch, in connection, in the reminder that they weren't alone in their grief. "Thank you," Yulian whispered against her hair, "for all of this, for seeing what I needed before I knew to ask for it. You would have gotten here eventually. Maybe. But it would have taken another century, and I would have been alone the whole time." He pulled back to look at her, his silver eyes bright with emotion. "I don't want to be alone anymore. I want you with me, Diana. Not just for now, not just until you age and I don't. I want you with me for as long as we both exist." Diana's heart stuttered. "Yulian, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you to stay, permanently. I'm asking you to consider turning, to join my world fully, to stand beside me not as a human visitor but as my equal, my partner, my queen, if you'll have me." He spoke quickly, as if afraid she'd interrupt before he finished. "I know it's a monumental choice. I know it means giving up the sun, giving up your human life, giving up the possibility of aging and dying naturally. But it also means we have forever. It means I don't have to watch you wither and fade while I stay frozen. It means we can build something lasting together." Diana felt dizzy with the enormity of what he was offering. To become a vampire, to become immortal, to spend centuries at his side ruling this hidden world, transforming from Diana the cleaner into something else entirely. It was everything she'd been trying not to think about, and now it was here, unavoidable, demanding an answer. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Hurt flickered across his face, but he nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Just know that whatever you choose, I love you. If you decide this life isn't for you, I'll understand. I'll cherish whatever time we have. But if you choose to stay, I promise you'll never regret it." Diana spent the next week in a haze of indecision. She made lists of pros and cons, had long conversations with Seraphine, who surprisingly proved willing to talk openly about what becoming a vampire meant, spent hours staring at the sunrise and trying to imagine never seeing it again. She thought about her mother, about what she would have wanted for Diana, and realized her mother would have told her to choose happiness, whatever form that took. Finally, she knew what her answer was. She found Yulian in his study late one night, working through correspondence, and he looked up with obvious nervousness when she entered. "I've made my decision," Diana said. He set down his pen very carefully. "All right. I want to stay. I want to turn. I want forever with you, whatever that looks like." The relief and joy that washed over his face was so intense it was almost painful to witness. He was across the room in an instant, sweeping her up into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You're certain?" he asked. "Absolutely certain. There's no going back once it's done. I'm certain. I've been falling in love with you since the moment I held your hand in the dark. I've been falling in love with your world, with your people, with the possibility of becoming more than I was. I'm scared, but I'm certain. I'll be with you every moment. The turning process is painful, I won't lie to you about that. But I'll be right there, and when you come through to the other side, you'll be extraordinary. You're already extraordinary. You'll just be immortally so." They spent the rest of the night making plans, discussing the practicalities, preparing for the transformation. The turning required an exchange of blood, vampire to human and human to vampire, followed by 3 days of death-like sleep during which the human body died and reformed. Diana would lose her heartbeat, her warmth, her ability to walk in sunlight. She would gain speed, strength, immortality, and a thirst for blood that would need to be carefully managed. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The turning itself was scheduled for 2 weeks later to give Diana time to put her human affairs in order. She quit her cleaning job, gave up her apartment, said goodbye to the few human friends she had with vague explanations about moving away for a relationship. It felt like dying a little, leaving behind this entire life, but it also felt like being born into something new. On the night of the turning, Yulian's most trusted advisors gathered as witnesses, including Seraphine, who had grudgingly admitted that Diana had proven herself worthy of this transformation. They assembled in a private chamber deep in the estate, a room Diana had never seen before, all stone walls and ancient tapestries and a sense of weight, of history. Yulian took Diana's hands, his expression serious. "Last chance to change your mind. No judgment, no anger. Just say the word and we'll stop." Diana squeezed his hands. "I'm not changing my mind. Let's do this." The process was as painful as he'd warned. His bite, when it came, was sharp and burning, and she felt her blood flowing out of her as he drank deeply. Then his wrist at her mouth, the strange cold taste of his blood on her tongue, the necessity of swallowing even as every instinct screamed at her to stop. The world began to fade, her heartbeat slowing, her body growing cold from the inside out. She heard Yulian's voice from very far away telling her to let go, to sleep, to trust that she'd wake again. Then darkness. When Diana woke 3 days later, everything had changed. Her first breath felt different, unnecessary but instinctive. Her vision was sharper, able to pick out details in the dim room that should have been invisible. Her hearing caught the sound of footsteps 3 floors away, of conversations happening on the other end of the estate. Her body felt strong, coiled with power she'd never possessed, and when she sat up, the movement was faster than it should have been, preternaturally smooth. Yulian was there instantly, kneeling beside the bed where she'd been laid out, his face a mixture of hope and fear. "Diana? How do you feel?" She looked at him, really looked, and gasped. He'd always been beautiful, but now she could see him properly, could see the way his skin caught and reflected light, could see the subtle play of muscle beneath his shirt, could see the exact shade of silver in his eyes like looking at Mercury in moonlight. Everything about him was heightened, clarified, perfect. "I feel amazing," she said, and her voice sounded different to her own ears, richer somehow. "Is this how you see the world all the time?" Relief broke across his face like sunrise. "Yes. Welcome to immortality, my love." The adjustment to vampire life was easier than Diana had expected in some ways and harder in others. The enhanced senses were overwhelming at first, requiring her to learn to filter input or go mad from overstimulation. The thirst for blood was constant, a low-burning need that Yulian taught her to manage through carefully controlled feeding. He provided her with donated blood from willing humans, explaining that his house had long-standing agreements with several human families who provided sustenance in exchange for vampire protection. She didn't have to kill, didn't have to hunt, which relieved a deep fear she'd been carrying. The loss of the sun hurt more than she'd anticipated. She mourned sunrises, mourned the simple pleasure of feeling warmth on her face, mourned the ease of moving through the daytime world. But she gained so much in return. She learned to move with vampire speed and grace, to hear conversations from impossible distances, to sense the emotions of those around her through subtle cues humans could never perceive. She grew stronger, not just physically, but in confidence, in presence, in the sense of her own power. Yulian guided her through all of it with patience and love, teaching her the rules of vampire society, introducing her properly to the court not as his human companion, but as his chosen queen. The title felt absurd at first, but she grew into it as she grew into her new body, her new life. She learned vampire politics, learned to navigate the complex hierarchies and ancient grudges, learned when to be diplomatic and when to stand firm. Seraphine proved an unexpected ally, respecting Diana's determination and quick learning, eventually becoming something like a friend. On the first anniversary of the memorial's dedication, Diana and Yulian returned to the courtyard together. The white stone monument gleamed in the lamplight, the night-blooming flowers filling the air with fragrance, and vampires gathered to speak the names of the lost once more. But this year was different. This year there was less raw grief and more gentle remembrance, less isolation and more community. The memorial had become a tradition, a healing ritual, proof that even ancient pain could be transformed into something meaningful. Yulian stood before the monument and spoke, as he had the year before, but this time Diana stood beside him. She spoke too, sharing what she'd learned from the stories people had told, reflecting on the power of remembering together rather than alone. Her voice carried across the courtyard with supernatural clarity, and when she finished, several people approached to thank her, to tell her that her presence at Yulian's side had changed things for the better, had made their king more accessible, more human, despite his immortality. After the ceremony, as they walked back through the estate together, Yulian pulled Diana into an empty room and kissed her with all the passion and gratitude and love he'd been holding back during the public event. "I love you," he said against her lips. "My queen, my partner, my salvation. You took my hand in the darkness and you never let go." "I never will," Diana promised. "We have forever now. I plan to spend all of it right here, beside you." They made love that night with the slow thoroughness of people who had endless time, who didn't need to rush, who could savor every touch and every whispered word. Diana marveled at the way her enhanced senses made everything more intense, more vivid, more overwhelmingly beautiful. She could feel Yulian's cool skin against hers, could hear the slow beat of his heart synchronizing with her own, could taste the hint of ancient power that clung to him like cologne. When they finally collapsed together in the tangled sheets, she felt utterly content, utterly complete. "Do you ever regret it?" Yulian asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Giving up your human life for this?" Diana considered the question seriously. She thought about sunrises she'd never see again, about the ordinary human future she'd surrendered, about the woman she'd been just months ago, scrubbing floors and dreaming small dreams. "No," she said finally. "I miss some things. But I gained so much more than I lost. I gained you. I gained purpose. I gained the chance to be part of something bigger than myself, to help heal old wounds, to build something lasting. That's worth any sacrifice." He pulled her closer, pressing his face into her hair. "You're remarkable." "So are you. We're remarkable together." As the years passed, Diana and Yulian built a life that was both extraordinary and surprisingly ordinary. They ruled the vampire house together, making decisions that affected thousands, navigating political challenges and ancient rivalries with combined wisdom. But they also had quiet nights in the study where they'd first really talked, reading together or simply sitting in companionable silence. They traveled to places Diana had only dreamed of seeing, walking through moonlit streets in cities around the world. They attended the memorial every year, watching it become more and more a true celebration of lives rather than just a mourning of deaths. Diana discovered talents she'd never known she possessed. She had a gift for diplomacy, for finding common ground between feuding factions, for making people feel heard and valued. She modernized many of the house's more antiquated practices, bringing in new ideas while respecting tradition. She established programs to support newly turned vampires, remembering how overwhelming her own transition had been. She became beloved in her own right, not just as Yulian's queen, but as a leader who genuinely cared about the well-being of her people. Yulian flourished beside her, his natural authority tempered now with greater warmth. His centuries of loneliness finally ended. He laughed more, smiled more, allowed himself moments of lightness instead of bearing the weight of leadership every second. The annual grief of the anniversary was still real but no longer debilitating, integrated into his life rather than dominating it. He credited Diana with all of it, though she argued that he'd done the work himself, that she'd just given him permission to try. 10 years after her turning, Diana stood in what had become their favorite spot in the estate, a balcony overlooking the gardens, and reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd been a poor cleaner, struggling to survive, dreaming of a better life but never imagining anything like this. And now she was immortal, powerful, queen of a vampire house, married to a man she loved more deeply than she'd known was possible. "What are you thinking about?" Yulian asked, materializing beside her with the silent grace of their kind. "About how everything changed, about how finding you crying in the dark was the best thing that ever happened to me." He slipped his arm around her waist. "I was thinking about the same thing. About how you held my hand and refused to let go, and how that one moment of compassion changed the entire trajectory of my existence. Do you think we would have found each other anyway, if I hadn't walked through that door that night? I don't know. I like to think the universe was conspiring to bring us together, that you were always meant to be here." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I'm grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful you saw me at my worst and stayed anyway." Diana turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm grateful you let me in. I'm grateful you trusted me with your grief, with your heart, with your future." They kissed softly, a promise and a celebration. Two immortals who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from shared pain and stubborn hope. The memorial ceremony that year was particularly special, marking the 10th anniversary of its founding. The courtyard was packed with vampires from across the region, many of whom had traveled from distant cities to attend. The white stone monument was now covered with offerings left throughout the year: flowers, letters, small tokens of remembrance. It had become a pilgrimage site, a place of healing for anyone touched by loss, and its reputation had spread far beyond Yulian's house. Diana gave the opening speech this time, talking about the power of transformation, about how grief acknowledged and shared becomes grief that can be borne. She spoke about the importance of witnessing each other's pain, about the courage it takes to let yourself be seen at your lowest, about the gift of staying when walking away would be easier. Her words resonated through the crowd, and when she finished, the applause was thunderous. Yulian stepped up beside her and took her hand, and together they unveiled a new addition to the memorial, a second stone, smaller than the first, inscribed with words Diana had written and Yulian had approved. Here we remember not only those we lost, but also the love that survives them. Here we transform grief into connection, isolation into community, endings into new beginnings. Here we hold hands in the darkness and refuse to let go. The crowd fell silent, reading the words, and Diana saw tears on many faces, saw the way people reached for each other, seeking comfort and connection. This was what she and Yulian had built together, not just a monument but a movement, a shift in how their people processed loss and supported each other through it. After the ceremony, as they greeted attendees and accepted thanks and congratulations, an elderly vampire approached them. He had the look of someone truly ancient, his white hair so long it brushed the floor, his silver eyes holding the weight of millennia. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing to Yulian with genuine respect. "And Your Majesty," he added, turning the bow to Diana. "I wanted to thank you for what you've created here. I lost my entire family in the wars 300 years ago, and I've carried that grief alone every day since. Coming here, speaking their names aloud, hearing others' stories, it was the first time I felt less alone in 3 centuries. You have given us a gift beyond measure." Diana felt tears prick her eyes. Even after a decade of vampire life, her emotions still ran close to the surface. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for trusting us with your grief. Thank you for showing us it's possible to survive it," he replied, "to transform it into something that connects rather than isolates. This memorial, this tradition, it will outlive all of us. It will be your legacy." After he left, Yulian pulled Diana close. "Did you hear that? Legacy. We've created something that will outlast even immortality." "We created it together," Diana corrected. "You had the courage to be vulnerable. I just helped you share that vulnerability. You always downplay your role, but everyone here knows the truth. You're the one who changed everything. You're the one who took my hand and refused to let go, who loved me through the darkest parts, who showed me it was possible to transform pain into purpose." His silver eyes blazed with emotion. "You saved me, Diana. In every way a person can be saved." Diana stood on her toes to kiss him, right there in the crowded courtyard, not caring who saw, not caring about protocol or dignity. She kissed him like he'd kissed her that first time in the guest room, with all the love and passion and gratitude she couldn't put into words. When they finally broke apart, the crowd around them was clapping and cheering, and Diana laughed, feeling young despite her immortal status, feeling joyful despite everything they'd been through to get here. "I love you," she told Yulian, loud enough that anyone nearby could hear. "I love you, and I choose you, and I will keep choosing you for every single year of forever." "Forever," Yulian echoed, pulling her close again. "That's exactly how long I plan to love you." Years continued to pass, decades blurring into each other the way they do for immortals, each moment precious but also part of an endless stream of moments. Diana and Yulian grew into their roles as leaders, as partners, as the beating heart of a community that had learned to value vulnerability as much as strength. The memorial tradition spread to other vampire houses, other cities, other countries, until remembering together became a cornerstone of vampire culture rather than an isolated practice. They faced challenges, of course. There were political rivals who objected to Diana's influence, to the way she'd softened the harsher aspects of vampire society. There were external threats from other supernatural factions, conflicts that required all of Yulian's strategic brilliance and Diana's diplomatic skills to navigate. There were personal struggles too, moments of doubt and fear, and the occasional fight that comes when 2 strong-willed people build a life together. But through it all, they never forgot that first night, that moment of vulnerability and compassion that had started everything. On hard days, when leadership felt overwhelming or conflict seemed insurmountable, they would return to Yulian's study, to the room where Diana had first found him crying, and they would sit together in silence, hands clasped, remembering that love was built not in grand gestures but in small moments of choosing to stay. On their 50th anniversary, both as a couple and as the memorial's 50th year of observation, they hosted a celebration that drew vampires from around the world. The courtyard had been expanded over the years to accommodate the growing crowds, and now it was a sprawling garden of night-blooming flowers and elegant stonework, with the original monument at its heart. like the center of a labyrinth. Diana stood before the gathered crowd, older now in the way vampires aged, which was to say, not in appearance, but in presence, in the weight of accumulated experience that showed in their eyes and bearing. She looked out at the thousands of faces turned toward her and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she'd built, the community she'd helped nurture, the love she'd found in the most unexpected place. 50 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across the silent crowd, I was a cleaner who made minimum wage and wondered if I'd ever be more than that. I was tired and poor and lonely, cleaning houses that belonged to people whose lives seemed unreachable to me. And then one night I opened a door and found a king crying alone in the dark. She felt Yulian's presence beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. I could have walked away, I probably should have walked away, but something in me recognized his pain, recognized the loneliness of carrying grief alone, and I crossed that room and took his hand. That moment changed my life. It changed both our lives. It taught me that compassion is never wasted, that witnessing someone's pain is never foolish, that love can begin in the darkest moments and grow into something that transforms not just two people, but an entire community. She squeezed Yulian's hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. This memorial exists because one person decided vulnerability was not weakness, because he had the courage to share his grief instead of hiding it, because he trusted me and this community to hold his pain with reverence rather than judgment. And we've grown into a people who value that openness, who understand that true strength includes the ability to be broken and to be witnessed in that brokenness and to survive it together. The crowd erupted in applause, and Diana saw tears on countless faces, saw people reaching for each other, saw the power of shared emotion rippling through the gathering. Yulian stepped forward then, and the crowd quieted immediately, respect for their king absolute. 50 years ago, he said, his voice rich with feeling, I was drowning. I had been drowning for more than 2 centuries, trapped in guilt and grief and the belief that I had to carry it alone. And then a young human woman with kind eyes and a stubborn heart walked through my door and held my hand. She saved my life. Not by fixing me, not by making the pain go away, but by showing me it was okay to be broken, okay to need help, okay to let someone see me at my absolute worst. He turned to Diana, his silver eyes blazing with love. You changed my heart, Diana Harrow. You took a man who thought he had to be unshakable, and you showed him that vulnerability is its own kind of strength. You took a king who was isolated by his crown, and you stood beside him as an equal, a partner, a queen who rules not through power but through compassion. You transformed my grief into something meaningful, my isolation into connection, my darkness into light. He pulled her close, ignoring the thousands of people watching, and kissed her with all the passion of that first kiss and all the depth of 50 years of shared life. I love you, he said when they finally broke apart. I will love you through every anniversary, every challenge, every moment of forever. You are my heart, my salvation, my home. Diana was crying openly now, vampire tears that glittered like diamonds on her white skin. I love you too, forever. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and countless stories shared. Diana and Yulian moved through the crowd together, greeting old friends and meeting new arrivals, accepting thanks and congratulations, and the occasional argument that they gracefully navigated. It was exhausting and exhilarating and perfect. Near dawn, when the crowd had finally dispersed and they had the courtyard to themselves, they stood before the monument one last time. The white stone glowed in the lamplight, 273 names carved in eternal remembrance, and Diana traced her fingers over a few of them, thinking about the people they represented, the lives cut short, the grief that had been transformed into this beautiful memorial. Do you think they'd be proud? She asked softly. The people you lost? Do you think they'd approve of what you've built here? Yulian was quiet for a long moment, considering. I think they'd be amazed. I think they'd never have imagined that their deaths would lead to something like this, that their loss would inspire a tradition of openness and healing that has touched thousands. And I think they'd be grateful that their names are spoken, that they're remembered not just by me, but by everyone who comes here. I hope so. I hope they're at peace. If they're not, then I hope they will be someday. But I know I'm at peace now, Diana. For the first time in centuries, I don't drown in guilt on this anniversary. I remember them with sorrow, yes, but also with love and gratitude for what they taught me. That's because of you. That's because you showed me how to transform grief into something bearable, something meaningful." Diana leaned against him, his cool, solid presence a comfort even after all these years. "We did it together. Everything we've built, we built together." "Yes," he agreed. "Together. Always together." They stood there as the sky began to lighten toward dawn, and then they turned and walked back into the estate, hand in hand, two immortals who'd found each other against all odds and built a love that had transformed not just themselves, but their entire world. Inside, they made their way to their private chambers, the rooms they'd shared for 50 years, and they undressed each other slowly, savoring the familiar ritual. When they finally came together, it was with the ease of long practice and the passion of eternal romance, pleasure heightened by the weight of shared history, by the knowledge that they had chosen each other again and again across thousands of nights and would continue choosing each other for thousands more. Afterwards, lying tangled together as dawn light tried to creep through the blackout curtains, Diana thought about the woman she'd been 50 years ago, pushing a cleaning cart through silent hallways, dreaming of better, but never imagining anything like this. That woman would have been terrified to know her future, would have thought it impossible, absurd, the stuff of fantasy. But that woman had also possessed the courage to open a door when she heard someone crying, the compassion to take a stranger's hand, the stubbornness to keep showing up even when told to leave. That woman had contained the seeds of who Diana had become, and Diana honored her, loved her, thanked her for the choices she'd made that led here. "What are you thinking about?" Yulian murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "About beginnings, about how everything that matters started with one small choice to care." "The best things always do," he agreed. "One small choice, one moment of connection, one hand reaching out in the darkness. That's all it takes to change everything." "I'm glad I reached out. I'm glad you let me in. I'm glad you were too stubborn to take no for an answer." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sleep now, my love. We have forever ahead of us. But right now, we should rest." Diana closed her eyes, feeling safe and loved and exactly where she belonged. 50 years as an immortal, and she still marveled at it sometimes, still felt grateful for the impossible gift of this life, this love, this man who'd been crying alone in the dark and had let her change his heart. Outside, the world continued its eternal rotation, day following night following day. But here in the darkness of their bedroom, wrapped in each other's arms, Diana and Yulian found their own kind of light, their own kind of peace. They had transformed grief into healing, isolation into community, a moment of compassion into a forever of love. And every year, when the anniversary came around, they would return to the memorial together. They would speak the names of the lost. They would hold each other through the complex emotions of remembrance, and they would celebrate the fact that pain acknowledged and shared becomes pain that connects rather than destroys. They would stand hand in hand before that white stone monument, a king and a queen, a vampire and a former human, two people who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from the ruins of old grief. That was their legacy. Not just the memorial itself, but the example they set, that vulnerability is strength, that compassion matters, that love can begin in broken places and grow into something eternal. Generations of vampires would tell their story, would speak of the king who'd learned to grieve openly and the cleaner who'd changed his heart. It would become legend, myth, the kind of story that inspired others to be brave enough to be vulnerable, to reach out when someone was hurting, to believe that connection could transform even the darkest pain. But for Diana and Yulian, it wasn't legend or myth. It was simply their life, their love, their truth. They were two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen each other across thousands of nights, who'd built a forever from a single moment of holding hands in the darkness and refusing to let go. And that, in the end, was everything that mattered.